All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rehab to Podcast Season 2. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We have an extra special guest. For those of you who are new to the podcast, I am one of your hosts, Alex. We also have Sean and Connor with us as well. And tonight's special guest is Dr. Beau Beard out of Birmingham, Alabama. He runs a clinic called The Farm. And you guys may or may not have heard of him before, but I'm going to let him give a little bit of an intro. So, Beau, why don't you take it away?
Well, first of all, I'm embarrassed that the background of your video is so bleak with all of our everything down in the office as we're getting ready to move here. But
all the back room.
Yeah, Alex is in the farm part 2, but soon to be we're moving into part 3. But yeah, myself and my wife Sloan opened up the farm, functional athletic rehabilitation movement back in 2014. I've been chugging away. It's kind of the practice that all of us, want to practice in or do practice in, active care model with, that chiropractic rehab component, getting more into the performance as a gym is getting added in along with this new space. So we're really stoked about that. And, yeah, I don't know how much more you guys want to know. We'll probably jump into some stuff, but that's it, man. Yeah.
You're moving into a brand new space, or is this like, are you getting rid of the old space, or are you keeping it?
Yeah. So it's literally like 50 feet away, but different building, which is cool. So this is actually a good little tidbit for, anybody that's going to open a practice. We started out in a 1,198 square foot space. So just under 1,200 square feet, perfect, low overhead, did what we needed to do. And moved across the street with people that were tenants, with us that were builders. They built out this current space, which I did a design, didn't realize how bad the design was until we're moving into the exact same square footage again, which is 3,000 square feet, but it seems gigantic because we're utilizing the space so much better. Everybody that's walked into it is like, this is huge. And I'm like, no, it's the same. It's the exact same. So yeah, same amount of space moving into, and then the gym next to it. So we're in 3,000 square feet. The gym next to it will be 1,500 square feet. So this is very reminiscent. If anybody's been in Winchester, Spine and Sport, very reminiscent of that, the build and everything. And yeah, the gym's going to be aimed at movement first, pound your head into the concrete second. So we're not just trying to defeat people every day, and a big youth developmental model there. I've been saying 8 to 18. That may change, but that'll be a big focus in the gym as well.
Yeah. Super stoked. It's going to be really cool. Yeah, we're moving everything this weekend. So hopefully goes
I'm taking tomorrow off to start moving, and we almost got hit by a tornado today, and then it dropped 40 degrees and it's supposed to be close to freezing tomorrow. So perfect. Let's just get after it. Yeah.
You know what they say, man. Roll Tide.
Alabama sounds nice.
That is not what they say. That's what they say if your IQ is not above a certain level. That's just the default. And you're like, I don't know what to say, and Roll Tide. Yep. I'm gonna get some flack for that one for sure.
Oof. That sounds
I'll be saying Roll Tide after my board exam.
Yeah. We have a huge Alabama fan following here.
Yeah.
Connor's right into it is Roll Tide.
They're like, not wrong. Right. Before we get into it, I just want to get a commitment from you that we can get you back on the podcast, because I think today we're not even going to be able to scratch the surface of some of the things we want to ask you.
Yeah, absolutely. Always here to help.
Know where to find them. All right, so let's get a little more specific on some of your background. So can you kind of give us an insight for those who maybe haven't heard, a brief synopsis of like how you got to chiropractic and then what led you down to the way you practice now? Yeah,
really brief. I broke my leg when I was a kid, like 10 years old, and had a lot of compensatory stuff that happened around that I was unaware of because I just didn't have a great scenario of rehab and PT. I had no PT. Had a titanium rod put in, and then I got into sports more heavily, obviously in high school, and stuff just became, ever present to me that something was wrong. And ended up meeting a chiropractor who, I'm from a town of 10,000 people. So this is kind of a weird anomaly that a chiropractor and her husband, both chiropractors from Miami, moved to Canton, Illinois, this podunk town. She was in the Olympics for judo, was a medalist. Her husband was as well. And then they come in and open literally a clinic that's almost like ours. This is back in 1999. a gym attached to a chiropractic clinic. They ran the gym too. I came in for an ankle sprain, and then she's like, what is going on with all this stuff? And we just started tackling, all my issues. And she was majorly influential to me continuing in sports, but then obviously getting into chiropractic. And then as I got into, chiro school, I also have a really good friend that I grew up with from the same town that went to Logan. That's why I chose Logan, and then got into Logan. And when I got there, I actually started, and this will kind of get into the R2P story a little bit. I knew right away, because of people that had went before me, to get into MPI. And then within the first year of school, sports council got started at Logan, which it had been there before. Like, I'm going to say 20 years before it rejoined the campus. So I started up with that, and then ended up becoming the president of that. And then the next step, which we'll get into, was R2P. So I always knew I wanted to be involved in athletics. I had this, pretty good mentor, which, funny enough, now she is a sports medicine physician, went back to medical school. And I've just been lucky to have, people in my life, like my best friend that's a chiro in South Carolina that went to Logan, that was a almost, Olympic swimmer, and just, it's all these people that are put in your way for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Connor, what you got?
Yeah, let's dive into R2P origin stories. So according to you, like, how did R2P get started, and what role did you play in its inception at Logan?
Yeah. So, the true origin story of R2P as an organization obviously starts with Craig Levinson and the West Coast crew. So I started at Logan in 2009, in the summer of 2009, as a chiro student. Started in the fall. I took a semester of prereqs. So in 2009 was doing MPI, and then in for sports council, I took over as president in 2010. So I was, I think, a try 4 by the time I became president, and did that for a couple of tries. So then I think try 6, I remember I get a email from, at the time, Marianne Harrington, now Marianne DMAC, who's on the board with me and an instructor at Parker. And she had been graduated already, so she was a year ahead of me. And she said, hey, Craig Levinson is wanting to hand off R2P, which I knew what R2P was only because of Marianne, and I already went down the path of what was called the ICSRC or ISCRS, which was International Clinical Rehab Society, whatever it is. And it was this basically certification that Craig had come up with, that you had these 50 core curriculum hours, which is everything from like DNS and the Boston Athletic Association sports symposium and Charlie Weingroff's classes, like all these things at the time that were the preeminent, rehab sports focused seminars. He said, you need these 50 hours to be up to snuff to call yourself a rehab doc, outside of what existed at the time, which was like diplomates in rehab and sports. And I had done all those by the time this thing came about. So I basically just got to sign up, check all the boxes, like, hey, look, I'm certified. Well, then she called and she said he wants to start a student club. So Logan was technically the first student club. So we had to start doing all the things that you guys are probably familiar with from a student side, right? Going into student advisory and finding faculty and all these things and checking the boxes. And I stepped away from the sports council to take over that role. But by the time that R2P actually got rolling, I was phasing out of school. And then, so I never really got to see it like get off the ground from a student club. And I actually handed it off to Anthony Amat, who was the predecessor to me. And he took the reins, and I mean, Anthony killed it. And, Anthony went fully involved after school into the, very much, Craig Levinson's teachings, went to every kettlebell class possible. So I was in that like too fledgling of a state, right? I never get to see it actually exist. What's interesting about that is here I'm technically certified, right? In R2P at the time, there was a certification that just existed in name only. You had all these ancillary classes, like another 200 hours you could take. So I kind of had this roadmap that Craig Levinson had laid out of like, hey, here's all these things. So that's what I started doing after school, just taking all these seminars. And I'm doing that, going about my business, SFMA, and, all these different classes that I'm taking after school. And then I get another call from Marianne. I want to say 2016, probably at this point. Yeah. 17, 16. And she's like, hey, Craig is now handing off the entire organization to me. And she goes, we need to form a board because his one stipulation is that this becomes a nonprofit. And she goes, so would you be the first board member? I was like, sure. So at that time I was saying yes to nothing because nothing existed. This was a only student club, no external, executive board. And then Marianne and I became the first board members. And then we had, God, who all was on there? Matt Ward, Jeff Barron, which Matt has stepped off. Jeff Barron is still with us. Trying to think who else was on it. Was Grant on it? I believe Grant was on the board for a little while, stepped away. Gosh, I think that's it. It was a pretty small group, and we started out like 4 people and kind of went from there. And now you guys know who the board is, obviously, with Corey Bailey, Kyle Utley. So it's kind of a 6-man crew now, or 6-person crew, and that's what we've been doing. And it's been the goal the whole time. The goal hasn't changed, to make this for me, my goal with it internally has always been to set the stage for the education level of what we should be learning in school. And I had always said this in meetings, that wouldn't it be cool if we actually started to set the bar for what's taught in school? Like, these classes are part of the curriculum, which some of them are, not because of us, but like SFMA is offered, maybe in core curriculum or an elective in some schools. MDT, neurodynamics, these things are coming into curriculum. And in my mind, it should just be part of the curriculum. Now, maybe it's a subset of study. It's not, if you want to, be a sports or rehab doc, sure. But yeah, it was kind of a just fortuitous path again of getting involved in MPI. MPI was very DNS heavy, which got me curious about rehab. Sports council, we were talking about this with Alex, that sports council, when I was part of it, was not just taping ankles. It was a lot of rehab. Well, then R2P came along, and the rehab side went over there. And then to see what it's doing now, I mean, it's just, it's amazing to me, because students are at the level now that they're teaching, I mean, so far beyond what we were. I mean, we were doing simple shoulder assessments and rudimentary rehab based on, the PDT or PT protocols at the time. It's just really cool to see how far it's come, and, what you guys on the student executive board and club leaders across the nation are doing. So, yeah.
So now that R2P is going to grow a little bit, there's more goals of like what you want it to be, or what the board itself kind of has an eye for its direction. But back when it was just a certification and it really didn't mean a whole lot, what was your drive, or anyone's drive, to like go after this certification? Was there just like a title, or what was the push?
Yeah. Well, and I'd have to ask Craig specifically what his goal was, because what it became for me was immediately, which I'm sure you guys see the same thing. There's a giant gap between, like, let's say I have a CCSP, right? So you do a diplomate level course, a giant gap in what that certification says and what you actually know how to do, right? So just because you have it, now what, I can step on the sidelines, I can do, some sort of care, which, yeah, you got the coursework, but it's no different than maybe the core curriculum in chiropractic school, right? We get this core curriculum, we get out. Are we truly prepared to step into the, a clinic that first day? If you just did the standard curriculum, in my opinion, no. Well, then, there's a rehab diplomate, same thing, in my opinion. And I'm not knocking these programs. All I'm saying is that there's a gap, right? And that gap really comes to practical application. And I think that's what Craig was trying to get after with setting up this curriculum, that, hey, these are the best things out there. You could still go take every seminar in the world and not have any application skills. But I think he was trying to create such a well-rounded one that, like, you got exposed to everything till you kind of came to your own conclusion, which has been one of my, it's not an aha moment. It's just the pattern I've picked up is the more things you go to and learn within what I would say just the greater conservative musculoskeletal realm, you realize everybody's doing the same stuff, because it's always on the same principles. They just have a different spin, whether it's assessment, treatment, systems, it's all the same stuff because it's a human. And then you do need to drive your own, maybe not conclusions, but, put your own spice on it, see what's going to work for you, work with your patient base, where are you located, what type of people do you like to work with? And I mean, I will give it up to Craig, and Craig obviously is always, I don't know if I'd say ahead of the curve, because there's a lot of people that are right there with him at the tip of the spear. I mean, Brett Winter's been right there, Clayton Skaggs, like they were all kind of in this bandy wagon together, in particular bringing DNS over here. But he is fully, embedded in the complete active care model, right? Like it's, hey, we want to be positive movement experience, maybe much more hands off than we originally thought we should be or need to be. But you could be anywhere in between, right? There's people that get results a lot of different ways. So he just set a platform out there that I think didn't exist. The certification went away for a lot of reasons. Like you said, certifications, a CCSP, a diplomate, what do they, it shouldn't always be what do they get you, but it should be what value does it add to you rather than putting letters behind your names. Because to be honest with you, I'll tell you guys a story because this is aimed at students in Kairos. I just received an audit from the ACBSP, right? So it's an audit system. You don't turn in CEUs to them. You just, if they audit you, you have to have CEUs, CPR card, all this stuff. I got audited, but then I kind of thought, I wrote him an email. I was like, I don't know if I'm getting any value out of this. Like, nobody cares if I'm in that directory. There's never been a patient that walked in and be like, I found you on the CCSP directory. That was ART's big plug back in the day. Okay, well, let's take the marketing component out of it. The education was part of my master's program, right? I was able to sit for the exam. So I got the CCSP for the master's. My master's program at Logan, I thought was fantastic. I know everybody has it's changed and every university is different. Mine was great. What I will say though is if you don't walk out of a seminar, and everybody says this, with something you could use the next day in clinic, or if you just spent 300 hours getting a diplomate level certification and you don't feel like it's, in 300 hours versus 12 hours, significantly altered the course of your treatment or how you approach care, something's up. And I just wrote him an email in response to the ACBSP and said, I don't know if I see the value. I'm not saying this is terrible, but for me, the World Games were in Birmingham, Alabama this year. I didn't even work them, which was an event that was largely run by Fix and ACBSP, just because, you only get your foot in the door with these certifications. And that's, in my opinion, not what we should be going after. Not a certification so it gets you to do something, but a certification so you have better skills, you're a better physician, which then should get your foot in the door because the skill set is greater, which I really like when people, it's not just experience, it's skills. So, somebody getting out of clinic from school right now could be just as skilled as somebody that is 20 years experience, because that 20 years experience wasn't sharpening and honing their skills. They became complacent, didn't do a lot of continuing ed. So I think it's empowering. Just realize the ball is always in your court. It doesn't matter how new you are. It doesn't matter how much you think you don't know. The amount of time, everybody will say this 10,000 hours and it doesn't matter, right? Alex and I had this conversation the other day. He kind of said, well, I don't have that experience. Why would people want to talk to me? Because you're skilled. You can be skilled. You could be a fluke, right? It's talent versus skill. Seth Godin was talking about this the other day. He hates the term talent. Is Connor a talented, chiropractor? What's that even mean? Are we talented with our hands? Maybe. Well, great. There's a lot of talented guitarists. That doesn't mean they're in the best band in the world because they can't put the pieces together. They can't they're not skilled, right? They're talented, which means then they lean on the talent and then that talent lean runs out. So I'm all about building skills through the curriculum that R2P props up and the people within it that are all about education, that teach and that we bring in to teach. And then of course, the students that are involved, the leaders in the student clubs, and then the National Executive Board, it's all the people that we want to be around and want to be, right? And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think was one of the biggest things that drew me to club initially, was knowing those were the kinds of people that I wanted to be surrounded by. So I'm just going to go be with them and then we're going to learn together. And that's how R2P I think has helped me a ton. Now I'm curious a little bit on we have had really good experiences with club, really good experience with R2P. Obviously it was established before we got into school. So from past and maybe present, what have you seen as maybe some of R2P's weaknesses that it's trying to work on now?
Yeah. We've talked about this a lot with the board, obviously. And when you get to kind of step back, that's kind of been the advantage of, being in practice and then looking at the clubs. There's two big things, and this is no knock. This is just a system as it's built. You have students leading students. That gets tough. It gets really tough because you're literally, as much as you want to bring in professionals it's just tough because you're only going to have, let's not say experience, but your skills are only so much because you haven't been tested. That's how you hone skills. So that's where it gets tough, because we want the clubs are the engine, but then we can't have the clubs running on, 72 unleaded when they should be running on like 98. And like, how do you do that? You need good docs and practitioners in the community, right? That's what this is a community. So there's a bevy of people to pull from, whether it's case studies, lectures, talks, just being involved, right? It shouldn't always have to be these overproduced, like, hey, we're going to do a seminar. Hey, we're going to like just a community of people to go ask questions, a forum to, bounce stuff off of. That's still lacking within the membership. And I mean, I'm on the board. This is on us. We need a place when, Sean has a question or Connor has a question, like it doesn't go to me, it goes to a general place, multiple people with different skill sets, experience, knowledge bases, backgrounds get to comment on it. Because I heard Rick Rubin on Tim Ferriss the other day had a really good insight of when bands submit songs to him, he does not allow them to put who the songwriter was. So if you had like a 5-member band, he doesn't want to know who it is. So he's not biasing his judgment based on who is the songwriter of the group. So I think that's what I would love to see, a forum where it's not, you don't know if it's me answering or not. You don't know. It could be, because what if a student puts up an answer and it's like, holy shit, that's awesome. And then it was a student, and maybe there's a voting, like, I don't know, there's a lot of cool stuff you could do with something like that. So that's one thing. The other is, probably some of the biggest downfalls is we lean too heavily on super specific stuff. Like, I know we want to know everything, but like for a long time when I first got on the board, like R2P was just seen as like the DNS thing. Right. I know that's not what it is, but like at certain schools, like that's what it seems like. It's like a DNS club. And then MPI or maybe the other groups will be like, oh, it's a DNS club. And it's like, and that could be anything, it could be MDT, but what's that dependent on? Probably the group leaders, the club leaders at the time. So that's something that we need, in my opinion, to say, if you're a doc in private practice and you're very heavily involved with DNS, of course, you're going to have a sway. Like, that's totally fine. But the best practitioners in the world have a multimodal approach. That's what we need to be getting students involved with, so they don't become chained to thinking that like this is the way you treat people with DNS or neurodynamics or MDT. Because, and I'll finish this up, what I have heard over and over and over from docs and students is when they get a patient is they're saying, well, I did MDT and it didn't work, so then I did DNS. I did DNS, it didn't work, so I didn't. Whoa. It's not a checklist system of our techniques. It's assessing the patient in front of us. You have a multitude of techniques to work on the thing you find. So for example, let's say somebody has hypertonicity trigger point in their upper trap. There should be 50 ways to treat that. You may be better at one, but there's 50 ways to treat it. So what's that mean? I had a patient today that told me she didn't want me to dry needle her or adjust her. And those were literally the two things that would have been the best, like the fastest. And that's what I told her. She was like adamant. She was scared. She didn't want to do it. So we didn't do it. You got to have other tools for those reasons. But also, like, that's kind of the game. Like, and the cool thing was today, my very next patient, exact same complaint, almost exact same profile of patient, just 20 years younger, did very different treatment with her than I even did with the prior patient. Wildly different outcomes, right? Like almost same exact. So it's just like, you're always playing this game of you're working with the most complex organism on earth. So if you don't think you need like 150 different tools, cool. Now, if, I'm not Pavel Collage by a country mile, but like, if you're an absolute master at one, maybe you do have a higher effective rate. But if you ever watch Pavel treat, he's not just doing DNS. Like, the guy created it. He's literally doing a bunch of other stuff. So if the guy who made the thing that we lean on, and it's not just DNS, like that should immediately get us starting to think like, okay, you have to be well-rounded, just like in life, right? It's not just one thing.
I want to hit back on one of the first weakness you said real quick.
Yeah.
Do you think, so students leading students obviously has its shortfall or shortcomings. Do you think that's a unique issue that R2P has, or do you think MPI and Soft Tissue Club, all those things have the same issue?
Yeah. So let's use a couple of those. The interesting thing with MPI is the community is strong, right? So you're, the skill acquisition or the skill set to acquire adjusting skills is not that steep of a curve versus the palpation skills. And that's what students want to learn right away. And then they realize palpation is more important than adjusting, but you can start teaching somebody to adjust really fast. And then they go to a lot of seminars and they're around some of the best adjusters in the world. So the community is extremely strong. And it's also, I'd say there's more touch points. So students involved with MPI tend to have more seminars in a year surrounding that thing. Well, then as it should be for a chiropractic student, because that's one of our biggest hammers, their skill set goes through the roof versus, this gets hard for R2P because it's like we just said, there's like 100 things, but you got to learn the principles. That's what I want people to understand. We are learning different techniques, which are honestly just different perceptions of the same problem or scenario or, approach. What we got to realize is we got to learn the principles of R2P, the principles of conservative musculoskeletal care and an active care model. You learn those, people get afraid of this term of making up your own stuff. We feel like we're a charlatan. You should be able to make up your own stuff because what? It's backed by science and you're applying it to physiology, biomechanics, anatomy, physics. And you're like, yeah, this adheres. Cool. Do it. Did you get results? Awesome. You do not need a peer-reviewed, RCT trial to say that thing's effective because a lot of the stuff that we're doing doesn't even have those anyways. So I would say, R2P is unique because you're trying to instill principles instead of a motor skill set. Does that make sense? And I know there's principles within MPI for sure. And then you get into like soft tissue club. It's kind of like hammer and nail, right? So you have these very much like, we've got a problem. This is how we fix it. It does get tough. And that's where if you want to be the best clinician in the world, build the best clinicians, you can't just rely on, again, motor skills and that talent of being good with your hands or being very charismatic. You literally have to start to build this you just have to build a clinician. That is a clinician, man, thinking on your feet, applied knowledge, on the fly, handling humans, which is part of it. And everybody, if you notice, is getting wise to this, right? MPI. They're talking about all of the stuff that we're talking about. They just lean heavier on the adjustment side. You go look at, SFMA, way heavier on like the exercise component that they used to be, right? Exercise, the 4x4 matrix used to be much more of just like, here it is. It's at the end of the book. Now they're like, hey, we have a whole course on this. So it's just, everybody knew it all along. They're just realizing like, oh, this is what people need is the ability to apply, which you cannot teach application. You can, but you're chained. You got to teach principles which allow you to apply with free thinking. Because I'll eat my words. You can teach people to apply, but you will absolutely just like, pigeonhole them right into the saying. And then they're not thinking. There's like, stiff ankle, adjust. Now what? Right? Tight muscle, do soft tissue. Now what? Yeah. And that's, that's again, not tooting my own horn, but that's like why I'm so excited to get out there and teach like this assessment course I'm going to teach. Like that's a big part of that. It's a big part of the principles. Like, dude, everything you're going to do is based on that assessment. Like if you get really good at that, like maybe it gets easier to do the stuff that you've been taught and you can pick tools easier.
Piggybacking off the last question, what does the board have in store for 2023? What are some of the goals and plans that you guys are coming up with?
Well, first of all, we got a stellar symposium coming up, which is only three and a half weeks away. So Annie O'Connor, Dallas and Parker Fit. So second year there. I don't know if Dallas is going to become just the yearly thing, but it's such a great venue. We do want to change the venue so we get different crowds and allow people to travel a little bit easier. Cause I know Connor, you're probably the furthest travel to Dallas out of anybody. So yeah, it's a Dallas Parker Fit first weekend of February and Steve Capobianco and Annie O'Connor, which it's going to be, this is a very different symposium. So going back in time, like last year it was myself, Jeff Barron and Cody DMAC, right? A very like a R2P principles symposium. you just kind of keep going back from there. I remember our very first symposium, we had a strength conditioning coach. We've had like Jimmy Yoon, we've had all these different people, Rich Olm, Brett Winchester, Courtney Conley. We're bringing the best in our field into these things, but this one's going to be different because what we kind of picked up over 2022 was a little bit of a gap in knowledge in the student base of, pain, which kind of surprised me because it's talked about a lot more than when I was in school, maybe, totally different of how it's talked about. The biopsychosocial, concept, which, little side note on that, it's a little bit of a pet peeve that we have to call it the biopsychosocial. That's a human. Like we should just say we're treating humans, but that's how it goes. We have to kind of say, hey, we got to think about all the parts. Well, yeah, you do. But like that's talked about so much. We were just surprised when we talked to a lot of students and docs, like how much the lack was there of like understanding pain and pain neuroscience and how to, treat patients that fall out of the typical musculoskeletal model for most of us. So super stoked about that. So that's coming up first. Something that actually just got solidified today, which will also set the stage for the rest of 2023. So we're going to do a live grand rounds at Dallas. Won't be at Parker Fit, it'll be in one of the classrooms, but that'll be broadcast live to members, R2P members. So that'll be myself and Corey Bailey talking about how to capacitize a patient, right? How to increase capacity from a strength and endurance standpoint with a current patient, which that is then going to catalyze. We're going to try to do grand rounds live, either every other month or once a month with a school. So instead of it just being me in this podcast studio, I'm not going to fly to the schools, but it'll be, hey, I'm going to be live for, Western states. And we are in with that group. And that is that live session. Everybody else can watch, but we're there for them. That's kind of one of the themes for the residency for 2023. And then 2023 is also the first year that we're going to have a few of our fundamentals courses being taught. I guess we kind of had one last year. Kyle Utley did one in Davenport, which was R2P-esque, but now we have our true fundamentals course, which is it's the tip of the iceberg on the principles we were discussing, right? So you need to wet your palate, know what to expect from anything that would come after. So if you took a DNS course, if you took another R2P course, if you went to the symposium, it's all kind of based on these, core pillars of assessment, treatment, and management. So we have a couple of those coming up. Everybody on the board is involved in teaching those. So I know Corey Bailey has a few set up. Kyle has a few set up. I have one set up in Dallas. So those are coming. So we're super excited about that. And we will have more brought to you by R2P courses with people outside of the board, which I'm also excited about. And that's really, we've talked about this a lot, but within the board, I think that R2P should become an umbrella, right? That we are a supporting infrastructure for people out there who are wanting to teach, whether that's people that just graduated, people that have current courses that are going on, people that are on the board, whoever it is. Like, we want to be the epicenter of the highest level of education for chiropractors and physical therapists and conservative musculoskeletal care and strength conditioning coaches. There, in my opinion, there's no epicenter. There's a lot of stuff that gets really close, but it's still kind of, broken across several systems, which then creates the same problem that you see within the medical system, right? This over-specialization, which gets into relying too heavily on certain techniques, not a lot of cross communication. So you feel like you got to go to a, strength and conditioning seminar. You got to go to a chiropractic seminar. You got man, we need a lot more mashup. So we realize, again, we're treating humans. We're not treating humans with DNS. We're not treating humans with neurodynamics. You think you are not, because there are people out there that went to school 30, 40 years ago that didn't learn any of the stuff that we've learned, that do a lot of the same stuff. And they just figured it out because they've dealt with humans for 40 years, 30 years, and they're smart and they stay principled. They don't go off the radar and just say, well, I'm doing this because I had results. So I think that's really the goal for 2023. Obviously, we'll be delivering more content via the membership. Outside of that, like we said before, like that forum, I think seems like such a just, you have a website forum, like that's so 1999. I mean, I'm up for other ideas, but like if you get, again, an epicenter of students being able to ask questions with docs and other students across multiple schools, across the nation, across the world, I mean, that's where you're going to make very cool connections. If we learned anything from like FTCA, I mean, look at what they've done. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. They have a diverse, large community of practitioners that they had to lay down ground rules so people know how to act, which is kind of a governance issue. But I think it works pretty well, right? I mean, everybody has their issues from an organization. That's what happens when you get a bunch of humans together. But yeah, that's kind of the gist for 2023.
Nice. Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to coming down to Dallas and seeing what Annie and Capo can bring this year.
Have any of you guys seen either one of them speak?
We had Capo on for an NSEB meeting about 2 months ago, and he was awesome. I haven't seen Annie speak yet, though.
Yeah, get ready for some literal song and dance from Annie.
Oh, yeah.
And then Capo is like the sneakiest, most humble. I mean, he literally, when we asked him to do this, which he taught our second symposium at Project Move in Denver that he used to be a part of. He was like, oh, I just don't think I should be doing this. I'm like, this is not an ingenuous, like, oh no, like he literally, I mean, I always tell people, if you want to look at the body of literature from improving afferent input to a human to decrease pain and increase motor output, he put it together.
Yeah.
He didn't do the research, but putting it together and then organizing it in a way that is easily accessible and teachable. I mean, literally it's the best, right? You could say, oh, I'm going to go take a rock blades course and people will turn their nose up to it. Go listen to the first 2 hours. And the interesting thing is, this is why Rock Tape was successful with their education. Anybody could teach it because of how he put it together. So you could have all these different personalities teaching the same stuff. It was the core, like the core of R2P, the core of Rock Tape was in that first 2 to 3 hours of the lecture before you got into the hands-on part of it, whether it was tape or blades or cups. And I mean, that is absolute freaking gold. And now that Rock Tape has been acquired and Capo stayed on as educational director and director of innovation, which is a fun title. Sounds like he works at Disney. He has all this time and room for imagination and growth. I mean, he's constantly hitting me up with these, like, which I love. Cause I'm so envious of his position. I'm like, the guy's just innovating left and right. And he's only able to innovate because what? He adheres to principles. He doesn't fly off the radar, which then allows him to just, grow or expand his knowledge, because now he's like, well, I know how this stuff works. Let me test it. Let me push the boundaries a little bit. Welcome to research. He may not think of himself as a researcher, but 100% is. So yeah, awesome. And of course, Andy's going to be awesome. Yeah, just amazing.
So I feel like one complaint that we hear a lot from students as school reps is that either they feel like they don't understand how to put everything together, or they feel like they're being taught systems, so on and so forth. And we get a lot of club reps listening to this podcast to kind of increase their own knowledge. So being your position and looking hindsight back to your time in school, for club reps, like, how do they better serve their school clubs? And then a second part of that question, how can they also get more involved with the organization as a whole?
I'm going to answer the second part first. I should have included this not just in the 2023 initiative, but like the initiative overall. There needs to be a very succinct path that's paved for people that are involved. Like, I think if you're an R2P rep as a student, then if you want to serve on the board, then you should immediately have the access to be on the board, right? And then if you didn't do that path, you can always be a member at large, right? Like and again, this leads to most of us that want to be doing this stuff want to do something besides just clinical work, right? Clinical work's amazing. That's what keeps you sharp. Maybe you want to teach, maybe you want to publish, there's other stuff you want to do. So like, we need to create a platform for that. So like, how do you get more involved? Like, you have to be a rep. Like, not everybody can be a rep. So if you can't be a rep, there are amazing opportunities, and maybe that's not the path. Maybe we don't set hard standards that you couldn't be on executive board, you couldn't be on the board later. But we want the people that have wanted to be at the top the whole time. And there's enough room, because honestly, there's more than enough work to be done. And it's not a lacking of what's to be done. It's usually a lacking of manpower. So like, I just think we have a ton of spaces to fill. And yeah, the more people are willing to help out, the bigger this thing gets and the better it is. And like, the more ideas we get. So the first question of, how to club leaders better disseminate the information or help their members put the pieces together. You actually have to teach somebody a system first, so then they can break the system. You have to, like, it's impossible not to. And that's maybe a fallacy that seems to come out of what we say sometimes. So I know it's kind of interesting. I can't remember who it was, and it doesn't matter because I'm, at the end of my talk at last year's R2P symposium, I remember the very first question I got was like, yeah, but what do you do if somebody has this? And I was like, shit, I literally just failed. Like, my whole talk was on like, a systems approach based on assessment. And they're like, well, yeah. Well, so if you're a student, let's say you're Tri-3 and you go into a club, you do need to like, kind of a systems. What you don't need is somebody to say, oh, you had a lateral ankle inversion sprain. You're going to do this. That's a protocol. That's not a system. What you want to say is somebody sprained their ankle. What do? We have an assessment, right? You have an assessment system. Okay, now that you assessed, you found out there's ligamentous injury, there's edema, we have inflammation, we have some hypertension in these muscles, and we see some like hip incongruency for stability. What do you do with that? Now you got a bunch of tools. You can play a lot of games, right? You can do a lot of different stuff, but figuring out those pieces, that's a systematic approach. Now there is a systematic approach to rehab, right? Which is kind of what Corey and I are going to be talking about in Dallas a little bit. What are those steps? Well, we have, these literally are the principles of R2P, right? Strategy before strength, capacitation before, performance. Like, if you don't follow these principles, you will literally fail, not based on our opinion, but based on physiology of a human being. The same reasons we get injured are the exact same reasons we need to reverse engineer to get somebody out of pain, rehab an injury, heal something, improve their performance, whatever you want to call it. If you can teach somebody those principles, it's no different than, teaching somebody to fish rather than giving them fish, allegory. Like, you got to teach them. And I just think too often we want to rush right into, we assessed shoulder, we found shoulder impingement, we did this for shoulder impingement, and then somebody picks up, that's what you do for shoulder impingement. So what I think would be a really cool thing, and I've talked about this a little bit, is like, you're always putting stuff back into the system, right? Like, you show them like, hey, we did find all this stuff and we did this today, but it's almost like you show, like, you want to get to the end of a case study and be like, there could have been like 3 options right here, 3 options right here, 3 options right here. And I know that would seem frustrating, but it also kind of starts getting them thinking immediately, maybe they see something on a slide and they're like, oh, that's what I thought we would have done. So they weren't wrong. Also, they don't get adhered to, this is what we do for this specific pathology or this person. But also then you can start doing what? They get into clinic, they get an ankle sprain, something doesn't work because not everything works with every person every time. And they know something else. They're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go to this next thing now. But that is a system, really. Like, that's, the checklist manifesto. Like, you will do better if you have a system. And then the people that break the system only do so because what? They went through the system and the system failed that patient at that time. Does that make sense to everybody? You did all the check boxes and they still didn't get better. Guess what? That is a flyer. That's a red herring. That's somebody that you need some creative on the spot thinking. Well, that's going to be really tough to do if you didn't checklist it, because guess what? You left like 6 options available that should have been checked. And then you like start trying to piece stuff together and you're like, God, I should have just went back to this very fundamental principle approach to things. So yeah, my long-winded answer is you got to actually teach systems to people that have less skill set built. And then as you build your skill set, you realize the limitations of the system, which then just like Capo pushing his knowledge, kind of playing with the edges. You do the same thing with your system and you push the edge with every patient. You don't try to cheat the system. It's not about like doing less because you've done more. No, you do less because you realize you can fly through the system just faster. You're more efficient, which makes you more effective.
All right. Well, So now we've heard a lot about, a lot of things, the history of R2P, how you, Beau, got involved with it, where it's at today, what it's planned for with the future, and really some really cool tidbits of information that you guys will hear if you attend a fundamentals course or anything at the symposium or anything like that this year, but about just how we can be better clinicians, right? What R2P is really about, taking all of these techniques and not adhering to one specific, as you said, do this for that, but how to take all of it together and actually apply it. So really appreciate you chatting with us about that. And now I think it's time for our rapid fire. So I'll start us off.
Can I say one last thing before we, just because I really wish we thought about, like, you know, physical therapy and chiropractic. Like, I think in chiropractic, you think I adjust and then I do rehab, right? Like, that's kind of the general consensus. Physical therapy, I do physical therapy. So it's very protocolish. I'm doing post-op protocol. I really wish we thought what we're doing is what R2P is teaching. I know that seems very heady and very like, we're the best. I just wish that's what the scenario was, that it's like, oh, this is how you treat a human. I don't ever want people to think that we're saying R2P is the best. Our job with the board is to do what? It's to constantly tear down what we're doing so it is the best, that we don't rely on our laurels of, no, this is what we do. We do DNS, neurodynamics. If something comes along that is like blows that technique away or is more efficient, more effective, it actually undercuts something we believed, we better be open enough and willing enough to change that. And like, just realizing that this is conservative musculoskeletal care. Does that make sense? Like, there shouldn't be different approaches. There should be like, there's not different approaches. I guess there are different like nuances to surgery, but surgery is surgery. Conservative musculoskeletal care should be conservative musculoskeletal care, not, oh, I went to a chiro, I went to a PT. That's what it is. Like, you went to this person, this is what it is. And then you have little nuances within, not completely different approaches, which, you know, is all of our struggles within the profession at large. So it's the last thing I wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, kind of just like a further explanation of something I remember you telling me. I think I was shadowing or interning, I don't know, in undergrad. And I remember you saying, if you can tell what my degree is based on how I practice, then there's something wrong there. Like, I'm not.
Yeah. And that's Greg Rose. I mean, that's what he's said for a long time. And, you know, the funny thing is I've said that to different clinicians and like, well, I don't agree. Like, you know, everybody's going to have their different spin. Like, a PT is not, man, there are literally strength and conditioning coaches that would blow a lot of people, like just kill a lot of clinicians in terms of outcomes, right? Because they would just destroy them because they have a better system, right? And then because they have a good system, it's almost like it doesn't give you permission to be creative and have freedom. It allows you to. It's almost like you get to be like, oh, take a deep breath. Like, God, the system worked. Oh, this is easy. Like, now I can kind of have fun. I can play around. I can be imaginative. I can try stuff. I don't know if it'll work because guess what? I know all this other stuff will work. Right. And that's what I think is very cool. When you give yourself that space, that's how you grow. If you were under the constraint of, I'm going to try this next because this didn't work. Oh, I didn't get amount of pain. I'm going to try this next. Like, you're literally just a hamster on a wheel, and you do not want to practice like that because you will get burnt out real fast and you'll be frustrated. And then what are you going to do? You're going to land on something that has mediocre success and just keep rolling with that. Scary thing there is, what do we know from our field, our at large, 60% of the time we actually make people worse. It's a terrible stat, right? So like, when we intervene, we're usually making people worse. And I say we, conservative musculoskeletal care, that stat should be flipped and pumped up. You know, if we're not like 80-20, like Pareto principle with our outcomes, like, what are we doing? Right? It's definitely not, I don't even think anybody's over 90, but like, man, if you're below 40 and it's not that you're not just helping them, you're making them worse. Like, that's a bad, like, can you imagine if you're a contractor, 60% of the time you like mess up your job and be like, yes, I'll still pay him. That's crazy. Right. So we got a big task ahead. That's why we need good people involved, like you guys.
Well, all right. Time for rapid fire. Let's see. I guess we'll start out with, what would you be? I don't know if I've actually heard this question. What would you be if you weren't a chiropractor? Sorry, I haven't heard your answer.
Ooh, I wanted to be special forces military, but then they found out I was colorblind, so I got that cut out. I wasn't a chiropractor. I'd probably be a professional photographer.
Okay.
Yeah,
Might have picked this answer. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
Checks out. All right, gentlemen, who's next?
What's your favorite book?
Ooh,
Fiction or nonfiction, and/or?
Can I give one of each, like a fiction, nonfiction?
Absolutely.
One of them's more up to date. Fiction is The Alchemist, and nonfiction it's just because it's more recent, is Range by David Epstein. I mean, fantastic book, like amazing book. And I can't believe it took me as long to read as I did, but I gave that book away to like 10 people this Christmas. Like, it's just a great book.
All right. Last one. You're on death row. You get one final supper. What's in it?
I think I'm going lasagna. And if I'm being specific, it's probably from Amore, which nobody's going to know, but there's this little Italian restaurant, it's right up the road from our office. John Travolta rents it out to have it to himself, like at least once a year.
Jeez.
Just like rents his place out, homemade noodles, like dimly lit. Looks like you're going to get stabbed by a mob boss if you mess up. It's just awesome.
That's how you know it's good.
100%. Yeah.
Good. And for Seth Graham listening, anybody else in the South, we need to point out that Sean used the word supper instead of dinner.
That's what it says in the notes. I would have changed it. What supper's lunch to you guys or dinner? I don't.
It's Last Supper. I mean, for death row, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Final meal. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never heard of supper.
It's a foreign concept. Oh man. Well, Beau, we really appreciate you hopping on with us tonight and just chatting about all this. We do look forward to having you on again. I know Connor had a lot of ideas, and we definitely decided it would not fit in one episode. So stay tuned, folks, because we will have the Dr. Beau Beard back on to discuss all of Connor's we're gonna edit that out. I don't really know what else.
Burning questions.
I feel like you guys can add some questions too.
It's gonna be the Connor show.
Yep, we're just gonna edit that out.
Yeah. Just you and me sit down.
Looking forward to
60
it.
minutes.
So anytime.
Thanks, man.
Thank you guys for having me on here.
Appreciate you. And everything you do for R2P.